We all expect the budget to be some kind of magic wand. And even though it isn't, every year people look up to the finance minister and to the budget to think that, oh, this is going to solve all our problems. In practice, it never does, but their hope rises internal in the human breast. So as a result of which, yes, we are still hopeful, government is still hopeful, and the economy should get back on track and we should be able to recover, which means government will get more tax revenue, it will be able to spend more, and hopefully all of us will also be better. Budget of the Union government is presented to Parliament on the first day of February every year. And it's like any other household budget or the budget of a corporate. It's essentially a statement of the government's receipts and payments. The only difference really is that in the case of a household or in the case of a corporate, we talk of income and expenditure. Whereas in the case of the government, we don't really call it income because the government doesn't really earn anything. But what it does, because it has the power to tax all of our citizens, what we call it is receipts and payments. Here, when we talk about the budget on the 1st of February, we're talking about the union budget. So the budget is essentially a statement of the government's receipts and payments for the year that is just coming to an end on the 31st of March. And it's also a projection of what government expects to receive and expects to have to pay out in the coming fiscal year, which runs from the 1st of April to the 31st of March next year. So now that we know what a budget is, it's also important to think of one more distinction between the budget of a household or a corporate and the budget of the government. The key difference really is that the government can afford to spend more than it receives year after year because it has the ability to fund the deficit. That means it has the ability to spend more than its receipts simply either by taxing us or because it has a sovereign right to print money. Now, obviously, printing money is not a very good way to do it. Responsible governments do not do it because that really increases the money supply in the country and will add to inflation. And no citizen likes to pay more tax. So sensible governments, especially governments in a democracy, which hope to get re-elected, do not want to tax their citizens too much. Because if you tax your citizens too much, they would not vote for you next time round. So a sensible government tries to draw this, walk this fine line between trying to balance its budget, its receipts and payments as best as it can. But in a poor developing country like India, the government obviously has to spend much more than it receives because the receipts by way of either tax income or by receipts by way of disinvestment or privatization of government's assets will not be enough to meet the needs. Particularly at times like this, when we're going through the COVID pandemic, the government has huge demands on its purse strings. The government has to spend on vaccination, on doctors, on healthcare workers. It also has to give some kind of aid to those who are at the bottom of the pyramid. So there are huge, enormous demands on government's purse. At the same time, precisely because the economy is going through a bad patch, the revenues, particularly tax revenues, will not keep pace. So the gap between the government's receipts and its payments is bound to widen at times like this when the COVID is creating such havoc amongst all of us, especially the government's finances. So the macroeconomic backdrop against which the budget is framed is very important. Each year when the government sits down, the finance minister and our advisors essentially sit down to try and frame this budget. The macroeconomic backdrop, that means how much can they hope to get by way of taxes, how much will they have to spend? All this is a very key input into the entire budget exercise, which is why the macroeconomic backdrop, the health of the economy, is such a key input. In fact, it is a very basic input because it is based on the government's anticipation of how the current year has panned out, that the government will know the key number, which is the fiscal deficit. We'll come to that a little later, but the government will fix the fiscal deficit in the year that is coming to an end. And how much more will that fiscal deficit be next year? Can it afford to have a larger fiscal deficit? Should it try and reduce the fiscal deficit? But all this is dependent on the macroeconomic framework against which the entire budget exercise is undertaken. Last year, in February 2021, when the finance minister got up to present her budget, it really was, we were at the bottom, really at the bottom, because the economy was projected to contract by 7.7%, the worst decline that we've seen in independent India. Fortunately, as things panned out, the decline was not so much. The economy declined by 7.3%, not that feared 7.7%. But the decline of 7.3 was also very bad. So as compared to that, now in February 2022, when she rises to present the budget for the next fiscal year, that is from 1st of April 2022 to the 31st of March 23, the economy is in decidedly better shape. But how much better? Is it better only because we shine in comparison to the past dismal record? Or is it because we're genuinely better? And here the sad truth is that we're only now clawing out of the abyss into which COVID had thrown us. So we are just barely back to the pre-pandemic level. So effectively, the Indian economy has lost 2 years. 2 years have been a washout, but the hope is that the next year will be better. So we thought, sort of, until Omicron hit us. And the way things are going, the way we are seeing cases rising day after day, we really do not know how bad Omicron will be. The hope really is that it will not be as bad as the Delta, in which case the government had to declare a lockdown and all economic activity came to an end. So this time what we feel is that Omicron is hopefully supposed to be milder. And so though there will not be any lockdown, it is possible that economic mobility, which is key to economic activity in an economy like ours, where services is such a large share of our GDP, in such an economy, because mobility will be hit, the kind of recovery that we were seeing in the past few months, that in some way might not be aborted, but it will slow down. So the real fear is that the recovery that we were hoping for will not completely materialize. So though it will not be as bad as it was in 2021, it will not be as good as we were hoping for. If we go by the South African experience, COVID, the Omicron variant of it will see a sharp peak and there will be an abrupt decline also. So though economic activity will be impacted in January to March, that is the last quarter of the current fiscal, the next fiscal, except for maybe a month or so into the new fiscal, that is April, after that, the economy should get back on track and we should be able to recover, which means government will get more tax revenue, it will be able to spend more, and hopefully all of us will also be better.